At the beginning, I want to express my special respect for this high body of the World Organization and to thank you for the opportunity to speak, which at the same time I consider a great responsibility for every word spoken. When we talk about Ukraine, it's very important to look at it consistently and to take into account the arguments of both warring parties. Of great concern is the fact that one can often hear only accusations that are not supported by arguments, much less evidence. The view of the war of someone who is from Serbia and who has survived and learned about the special methods of warfare may differ from many others who do not have this experience. That is why, from the beginning, I considered the war in Ukraine to be a hybrid war and compared it to the one that was waged on the territory of the former Yugoslavia in the 90s of the last century. In terms of the external influence of the preparation of the war to the direct and indirect participation in the war through the training and arming, bringing in volunteers and commanding of the army. I will mention a few of the most important examples. The first is the case of the Croatian General Špegel, a member of the Yugoslav People's Army, who smuggled weapons into Croatia through Hungary, Austria, and Italy, armed paramilitary formations and prepared them for attacks on members of the regular army even before the start of the war in Yugoslavia. In October 1990, the Counterintelligence Service recorded Špegel's conversation, from which it became clear that he received help from the US for these operations. The leadership of Croatia, in agreement with Slovenia, illegally imported large quantity of weapons from former Warsaw Pact countries, such as Hungary and Romania, and disarmed 100,000 of members of paramilitary formations. Another example is the arming of Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina. 1992 to 1990. The other, which was carried out through Croatia, but with the knowledge and approval of the American administration, George Bush, later Clinton. Bosnian Muslims were also armed during the embargo. The biggest concession to Muslims in UN protection forces permission to arm Croatian and Muslims until units under the conditions of an embargo on the import of weapons and all kinds of control was their basic task. There is evidence that even weapons from the American Ramstein base in Germany were delivered to Muslim forces in Bosnia. American Admiral Leighton Smith and French General Bertrand de la Prelle in 1994 agreed that arming Serbia's neighbors was a big obligation. Is the arming of Albanians by causing a rebellion in 1997, in which weapons were taken from military warehouses in Albania handed over to members of the terrorist Kosovo Liberation Army. It should be noted that Albanian separatists formed the official Kosovo Army in 2018. 1244 and Malaysia are training and arming this illegal Kosovo army. Today in Ukraine, we can also see examples of both direct interference in the conflict, where Western countries send weapons to the Ukrainian side, and the use of third countries to supply weapons to Ukraine. Recently, a Ukrainian plane that took off from Niš and was loaded with weapons crashed in Greece. Today, weapons also reach Asian and African countries. These weapons in Ukraine are killing the civilians population without choosing whether they speak Ukrainian or Russian. The Center for Geostrategic Studies, which I lead, recently sent a letter to the UN, Council of Europe, the Red Cross, and other institutions. The content of the letter states the following facts. It is evident that the Ukrainian army often used prohibited cluster weapons, which it targets the civilian population in east of Ukraine. And inspection of the situation on the ground revealed target Izium with cluster bombs, which led to the death of the large number of civilians. In the Donetsk region on July 20, several missiles attacks by the US high mobility artillery rocket system were carried out by Ukrainian army on the places of Elenovka and Alexandrovka. Attacks were carried out on civilian objects and infrastructure. Then on the night of the July 29, there was another attack by the Ukrainian army on the detonation center in Elenovka, where prisoners of war from the Azov battalion were also held. As a result, 51 people died and 75 were injured. Then on July 30, the Ukrainian army targeted the center of the densely populated city of Donetsk, which had previously been demined and completely cleaned. On that occasion, the Ukrainian forces used Uragan missiles of NATO production, which, in addition to the standard destructive effect, are equipped with cluster munition. Each of the rockets contained a large quantity of banned PMF-1 Lepestok anti-personnel mines. It completely paralyzed the city and the supply of food and water to the inhabitants for several days. From all of the above, it can be concluded that the Ukrainian side perceives civilians as well as prisoners of war as legitimate targets, and that it acts in order to achieve as many victims as possible among them, which is against all the rules of war and international humanitarian law. In addition, the weapons countries delivered to Ukraine in a large number of cases, 20 to 30%, through corrupt members of SBU and up in the third countries, often in the hands of destabilization of many regions. There are well-founded suspicions war in Yugoslavia represent a potential dangers for the outbreak of. There are indicators of renewed preparation for unrest in Kosovo and Metohija through extremist structures in order to increase the presence of NATO forces. The situation today is more than dangerous, and the hybrid war threatens to turn into a direct conflict on a large scale, which in the condition of modern weapons calls into question the survival and future of our civilians.